We're on videotape now, so can you briefly just introduce yourselves before going on with questions?
Sure. Kelly Minton with the U.S. Digital Service.
Vicki Barber with the Federal Trade Commission.
Gwen Coggins with the United States Patent and Trademark Office.
Lacey Damon with the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Linda Gray, Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you.
So to continue with the question, Linda, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your agency and the need to hire from industry?
I think it's a combination of hybrid approach because of course we have scientists, biologists, that kind of thing. And so you have to use a hybrid approach to gain that experience. So I think of it more, when you have a lot of specialized experience, there's a need to pull from industry versus just being able to rely on what you have. We also utilize a lot of the hiring flexibilities dealing with the colleges. Because a lot of our jobs center around the STEM majors.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of hiring of students coming fresh out of college to train them up. However, that hybrid from industry helps us to bring in some more experienced individuals, as well as the cross-pollination with those that are currently in the EPA. Just going a couple months back to my CBP days, Customs and Border Protection, where we were training the agents and officers, so they kind of all start at ground zero, so to speak. And you can't, most of the times, parts of the job you can't know unless you go through the training academy. Right. So it was less important to have people from industry as it was, just to have someone come in and train them. But now in this particular position where I am, we need that hybrid approach in order to have some experience with different industries, biologists, chemists, that kind of thing in our STEM fields.
Great. What are some of the biggest challenges you guys are facing with when you're looking for specialized talent?
For us, it's sometimes the hiring flexibility.
Okay.
We have various authorities we can use. We use Peace Corps volunteers. There are certain authorities you can use. However, in order to get that experience and bring someone externally, there are certain laws there. Of course, as a federal servant, we definitely have first priority to veterans preference. And there are some authorities where you can or cannot bring individuals on who may have some of that experience, especially some of the students that are new. They wouldn't have any special authority necessarily or any experience. And so we're trying to bring them in and train them into that field because they've gone through the education piece. So that's a little bit of it, and more like when discussed, it's not necessarily the getting them in, because a lot of people are eager to get in, get their first job, that kind of thing. The thing is keeping them. And so I'd be very interested in the panel, I think Debbie discussed that we're having next month, for that generational thing, because that's very real for us. The generational differences has changed how we are able to attract and retain our workforce.
Great. Anyone else on the panel want to talk about some of the challenges that you see and how you're overcoming them?
I think from our perspective, we're very lucky in that we have a special statutory authority that allows us to actually pay additional compensation above and beyond the normal GS scale. But the interesting thing is, even though we can do that, we still have a good number of people from industry, where industry can compete at levels that we can never compete at. So what we have found is that we need to continue to offer new incentives that are outside the typical salary to try and encourage people to come to us, such as, and Wynn can probably is in the same boat as me, we offer a lot of telework, we offer flexible work life, and those types of things that are more, they're not necessarily tangible, but provide a lot of intangible benefits to employees that would encourage them to kind of take that drop in pay to be able to realize that there's a lot of benefit to working in the federal government.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Lacey on that. For us, it's not necessarily a pay thing. We get folks that are very interested in coming to work for us. I would say our biggest hiring challenges are not in our major swim lanes, which is patents and trademarks. It's in our IT space. So it's bringing in those right IT specialists with that right mix of IT talent. And a lot of times, they do want to work for not the government. They really do want those bigger paying jobs. So it's really hard to find that particular talent for us. That's one of our bigger challenges. But for the most part, we have pretty good luck bringing in and filling our hiring quotas in most of the areas of the agency.
And so that's similar for us as well, particularly now in the areas of privacy and cybersecurity.
Yes.
So folks that are in the cybersecurity space think that they're awesome, and because they're awesome, it's like I give you my resume and hire me, and I don't understand the legs that I have to go through. Okay, we're in round 1, round 2, you know, I was awesome today, I'll be awesome in 90 days. And so why do I have to jump through the hurdles just to provide a service? Particularly when I can go in somewhere in the private industry, make a lot more money, and if I'm coming to serve the, you know, public service and have a dedication to public service, what is it that you can do for me in the public service space to make the hiring process a lot easier?
And to add to Baby's point on that, what we run into, not problems with, but is as an enabling service, as a hiring function for the agency, the client expectation can sometimes be here, and our ability to deliver is just not quite there. And so trying to, because of these reasons, because it's very difficult sometimes to find this special talent out there and bring them in for what we can actually afford to offer them in the federal government salary-wise. So sometimes our challenges are, yes, in the hiring, absolutely, but it's also in meeting that customer expectation.
Yes.
And trying to make sure that we're all working together, you know, we're one family, we're there to support you, but we need to understand the parameters and the constraints that we're all working under. So for us, that's been a little bit of our challenge just internally to get that message out. A little off topic, but.
No, it's interesting, because I do wonder, like, in terms of the data that you have, what are the greatest levers that you do use? You know, because let's take salary off the table. Can you talk a little bit more about, you said teleworking, what else are you seeing in terms of working, to incentivize people to join?
So a lot of us telework, flexible work schedules, you know, as Linda has said, and a lot of us around the table probably use and use well. We have been, and very fortunate to have been, a best place to work under the ACT-IAC, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. 2013, we were #1 in our particular area. And then we've been kind of steadily around the top 10 in the past 2 years. Now this is after risen from like 297, I think, you know, like 3 from the bottom, 10, 15 years ago. So we've had a lot of luck in really dialing into what is that secret sauce to, attracting employees, engaging employees, and making them feel good about the job that they do. And a lot of it we're finding is the telework, it is the flexible work schedule. Salary, we do compare well when we ask on the survey, how do you feel about your salary? Most folks are pretty happy. But there are people that, it's not what they want. They go out and find another job making more. It's engagement. It's employee engagement.
Yeah.
We've done a lot around employee engagement, really dialing into, what we call the employee value proposition. So what attracts you to an agency or organization, what keeps you there, what makes you happy. It's that whole kind of messaging around employee engagement. We use the ACT-IAC to give us some of that data. But as an organization, we've also gone out and sourced an off-cycle survey that we use also every year through a company called Sirota that helps us dial in deeper, because if anyone's familiar, I'm sure a lot of you are, with the ACT-IAC, it's not a full census survey. So it's not going out to all your employees, and it only asks a certain number of questions that you really don't have an ability to influence. We find that going by through another private party survey, we can actually design the survey, we can influence the questions, we can do some open-ended that we really designed around that employee value proposition, what attracts you, what keeps you here, why do you think that we're an employer of choice for you and a promoter of choice. And we've really gotten into not only the STEM stuff, as Linda was talking about, but also the male versus female population. So as a woman, what attracts you to the agency, what keeps you here, kind of thing. So we've had a lot of luck just working with our survey data, if that's helpful. I didn't mean to, of course.
No, that's perfect. That's exactly the answer to the question. Yes, thank you. Anyone else want to add other levers they're using to attract people to join?
Well, I think one of the things I'm finding is that dealing with different generations, the desire to do more is very different, to have rotational opportunities. One of the things I've noticed in the short time that I've been in the EPA, there are a lot of details. I probably get one via email every day that comes from various offices. So there's an idea to do a lot of rotation. And so that gives people various work experiences. And so I found that to be very helpful, along with the work-life flexibilities. I think that's big, having been in 7 agencies now. Some have had a more robust work-life program than others. But really expanding those flexibilities, especially here in the DC metro area. There's so many federal agencies you can move to. So if your agency offers 4-time telework or 2 days telework, and another officer saying, well, we don't believe in it, People are much more interested in being able to balance their work life. So those are very big for us as well.
Especially with the community in the Washington DC area. The one thing I will add that hasn't been raised yet is we do have a lot of work-life balance opportunities and programs here at the SEC, but one that hasn't been mentioned is our student loan repayment program.
Oh.
And that is something that we have really invested in. We are one of the top organizations for doing that. And what that has allowed us is, especially those more the millennials, it's really been enticing to them, especially because most of them are graduating nowadays with a lot of debt. And so that has been something we've focused a lot of energy and time on, and it's been very beneficial. We have over 800 participants in our program this year, and so they lock in for 3 years at a time. So that's really helped us in trying to encourage them, letting them know that the agency's committed to them and their growth.
Wow.
So
So it's like 50% of your people over the past year, right?
Oh,
You're saying, or
we're-
the ones just newly hired, because you said about 1,500?
Well,
Past.
the interesting thing about our program is that parents can participate as well.
fantastic.
Because we support Parent Plus.
Yeah.
So we not only
That
have
is
people
great.
in their entry level, but also for more of our long-standing employees
Yeah.
who might be going through that next stage of putting their kids through college, we support that as well.
Can I give you my card? How did you do this?
Fabulous.
Need more information.
It's always in the boundaries of Title V, but it
Okay.
has been a retention incentive that we focus a lot of time and attention on because there is a lot of demand. And we also align it with the new programs that have come out from the Department of Education that allow for forgiveness.
Yeah.
So we run the program so that people get bi-weekly payments into their lenders, so that then they don't have to make payments during their time with us.
Yeah.
And then they can also calibrate it out so that when they hit their 10-year mark, they can still be participating in the forgiveness piece.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's incredible.
That's really amazing. Awesome. We do something not like that at all.
Managing expectations.
Wow, again, I'm going to share my card with Lacey. I have 2 kids coming up, so. But we do, once you get on board at the USPTO, you have options to go to law school, apply to law school, and have your law school program paid for. And then also too, if it relates to what we call your technical docket, you can take technical classes at school at night, and we would pay for those classes, and it usually results in a degree. So we can't say that we pay for your degree, but we pay for your classes that usually result in a degree. So I would be really curious to see how you guys have, we can talk offline later about that, because I imagine that's a huge budget hit for you guys, student loan repayment, yeah.
Well, we also have a similar program to what you offer as well. We have tuition assistance program, and then we also partner with some of the universities that are local here and have law certificate programs that will apply towards their LLM. So we try to hit people and think about the entire life cycle of someone and where they might want different incentives or different opportunities, and target it to different populations to try and encourage our employees to stay.
Great. Would you like to add?
The only thing I would add to that is that we're also looking at how we can offer a career versus a job.
Yeah.
So that's part of how we attract, especially the younger workforce, to say, okay, you can move here and move there, because we notice that movement is really big. And so if you look at that whole snapshot of where you want to go, and I thought about that when Lacey was just talking about the 10-year mark.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are coming out with a lot of debt. I have one that's going in the fall, and I said, you have some debt too. We're going to share this responsibility. But I did like the Parent Plus part, because that's my side. But just kind of looking at how we can prepare the career part, because I've had students that may be in there a couple of years and I'm not going to stay. And I'm like, no, you need to understand the career part of the federal government. And I think also the stability is something that is very attractive as well as relates to a federal career. Not as strong as it used to be, but I think that is another attractor of the federal government as an employer, because I hear a lot of people talk about the amount of money they can make, but they also weigh that against some of the stability. And then we have some that'll come in for a little bit, go out, make some money, come back. And so I think also the retirement systems, that change also allowed for that flexibility to kind of come in and come out with the portability of it. So kind of highlighting some of the things that we offer in the federal government, it's also been an attractor.
That's great. Vicki, do you want to talk a little bit about what you guys do as well?
Sure, we're just starting to explore a lot of it because as a small agency, we don't have the resources to do a lot of the research behind it. But once we see that something is working well, then we'll reach out to an agency where it's working well and then ask, where some of the hiccups were, what is it, and then we'll try to model it to fit our need. In the FTC, we don't have usually any problem at all with recruitment. As a matter of fact, I would like to have less. Because when you're trying to say who is the best qualified and for our attorney positions, obviously, you get so many applications and trying to move things through really quickly to get to who is the best mission and skills match. And then once they're there, what is going to keep them? We score really well in the employee viewpoint survey, but one of the areas where we do struggle is in the pay area. And so because of that, we've started to explore, other than that monetary salary boost, what are some of the incentives that we can do. And I'm hoping that in June, I'll be able to provide some other flexibility so that then we can enhance some of the pay, the compensation package. So I'll say it as, in formal words, rather than pay the whole compensation package, and then start to promote our agency in that way.
Great. And you mentioned recruitment, which I thought was interesting. Can you tell us what your individual efforts are in terms of finding the talent? Do you actually actively recruit passive candidates? Can you tell us a little bit about how you get to that talent?
So for economists, we will go out and recruit. We have using, I think it's called Job or something, and I apologize that I don't have the name, but it's in February. It's a focused recruitment effort for economists. Just this last year, because we're getting more into the cybersecurity space, we partnered with OPM and National Science Foundation to do more scholarship for service. And so we did our first virtual fair with the SFS program. And for attorneys, we don't necessarily go out and do a heavy recruitment, but there are some schools that seem to lend themselves more into the antitrust space. And so we'll target that community.
Great.
So, we obviously do recruit from schools, so we have an identified list of schools that we go to every year, and we go and participate in hiring fairs. But we also try to act more like the private industry. So we partnered with LinkedIn a couple of years ago, so we have our own LinkedIn page where we were able to post our job announcements. For some of our trickier positions, we've actually hired headhunters to try to hire for those kind of top jobs where we have not been lucky or fortunate in actually identifying the right people. So we really do use a lot of social media and a lot of contractor support for some of those jobs. Just it's a mix. Just as we will typically go to a school and try to do the kind of boots on the ground at a school, at a job fair.
Great.
So from our end, we do a lot of recruitment. We actually have an Office of Minority Women Inclusion that requires us to do outreach to the schools. The interesting thing though is we hire very little entry-level positions. Most of our people come to us with 7 to 8 years of experience having worked in the industry. And so we use LinkedIn, a lot of different social media platforms to try and entice people to come to us. We also have extensive recruitment where we post out on the job boards and stuff like that to try and encourage people. I will say though that we have no shortage of interested people and trying to find the right interested people.
Yes, exactly.
So every so often we do some data mining and try and call up people who may not necessarily be looking, but try and send out blasts to them to try and encourage them for our more special, unique positions.
Great.
And I think it's the same for us. A lot of recruiting done at the colleges for those STEM majors, as well as some of the regular, there are different federal government institutions that have regular conferences, that kind of thing. We also do presidential management fellows.
Oh, great.
And I also mentioned the Peace Corps. That's a big one for us, Peace Corps volunteers that we bring in. So any number of recruitment events. From the law enforcement side, same kind of thing. Just recruitment kind of all over the place because it's entry level and they have to really just have 1 year work experience.
Yeah.
And so in those instances, you can do a lot of recruitment for those criminal justice majors as well. But it's a very lengthy and stringent background investigation process. So you also have to make sure that you're recruiting from areas where you think that you have a candidate who can pass those integrity things. And that's always a tricky thing because, with the institution of legalized marijuana, it's still not okay for federal. Really.
Right.
Seriously,
Yes.
we really had a lot of problems with that. And so we try to catch them very early on because, of course, college is where most of us lose our mind, at least for a minute. And then kind of come back.
I
So
wonder what the connection to legalized marijuana is gonna be.
Exactly, that's the connection. And so really trying to, I think one of the things that we don't do, that we've tried to really look at recently is really catching people much earlier because of the things that I've said.
Yeah.
And so backing it all the way up to middle school, where you're really saying to people, oh, you want to be in law enforcement, oh, you really want to be a biologist, oh, you really want to be, whatever the field is. I think that's one of the keys that we've learned to recruiting in whatever federal agency it is. So that individuals are able to really start tracking in their areas. Some of the programs and things that are available now to my children weren't available to us when I was coming through. I mean, my son and daughter have been through programs 4 and 5 years, when they graduated high school. We didn't get those until afterwards. So I think really locking into some of those programs, STEM programs. He's going to a STEM program this summer. And so I think federal agencies really are starting to connect with the colleges with those programs as well for recruitment purposes.
One thing I would just contribute to that is I agree. We have actually a program called Propels here at our agency, and we host it at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. And it's not only here in headquarters, but also in our 11 regional offices. And we go out to high school students who are thinking of pursuing financial occupations. And so we bring them in, we allow them to shadow and kind of get a better understanding. And we usually have, I'd say, over 300 students who we touch a year. And then we also have a program where we bring in volunteers throughout the year, and we have over 800 that are in the college field, that are already in college. And so that's helping us to develop that pipeline, but to encourage that interest in the federal government, because I think there's not enough exposure as they're going through. They see the private sector as their first inclination, and getting them exposure to us can always be helpful.
Yeah, and so at the FTC, we've partnered with the University of Maryland in their global and federal semester programs. And so that's worked really well for us, and because folks, they may major in accounting or major in economics, but they don't necessarily know what occupations will match their major. And so they're usually really delighted when they find that we have some forensics positions that they will, they're able to go ahead and pursue as an occupation once they graduate from school.
Awesome. So industry moves fast, in terms of you could be interviewing on Monday, get an offer Friday, start the next week. What are you or your agencies doing to compete in this area? And anything that's working?
We're not.
That you'd like to share?
It's not. I will say one of the things that we've done very recently, you have these college students coming out, and so one of the special authorities now is pathways programs where they can come in right after they graduate. And so what we've started to do is kind of back up that timeline, because typically you could not really, you can't bring them on board anyway until you verify the degree. But we're starting the process much earlier so that you're able to just at the end of the process now you have the degree, but they've already finished everything else. So they're prepared because those senior years, they're getting offers from the external market, and we're just really late to the game. And so we started to do a little bit of that. The hiring process in itself, we typically would not be able to hire somebody on Friday and bring them in on Monday. I've not seen that happen. So if you all have an authority on the panel that you're using, please let me know.
No, I no, not saying that at all.
I think maybe the earliest has been, you
Yeah.
know, when you're transferring from another
Yeah.
from another agency, that's probably the quickest we can get that. But I've not seen much faster than that unless you have or utilize some of the direct hiring authorities that you have.
Okay.
And when you use those, that cuts down on a lot of time. And so I think
Okay.
we're looking to utilize much more those flexibilities because you're able to cut the time. Now, the other thing that you have, I was just talking to Lacey before we started, depends on what your security process is as well.
Right.
Because some agencies require different levels of security.
Right.
So of course, in the law enforcement arena, it can be 3 to 4 months.
Right.
Where I am now, it tends to be much shorter because you may just have the OPM NACI check.
Yeah.
And so all of that is included in the process to get on board. And so we're looking at ways to kind of do those processes simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. Parallel
to-
tracks.
Parallel
Right.
tracks in order to bring individuals on much more quickly.
It does sound like you were able to flip some of the process, right, and put it ahead, and so when they're ready, you're ready.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah, something that I would like to add on to that, so, you know, we recognize that as a challenge, absolutely, we are competing, you know, against the private sector for talent, and some of these offers, they go out so fast from the outside, from the private sector, and we just cannot
Right.
compete with that. So we kind of turned it into a little bit of a marketing strategy, knowing that we do have folks we try to reach out to, we offer them jobs, it does take time. For those that haven't heard yet, we try to keep them warm, so to speak.
Yes,
Just, you know,
yes.
continuing to market to them, that, you know, hey, hang in there, be patient. So we built in a lot of touchbacks
Yes.
to the folks we're working with. But just a cautionary tale, because we are the federal government, so once you're hired and onboarded, we have you for a very long time. And if it's not a good match, for whatever reason, it's a very different process to exit someone from the federal government than it is from the private sector. So we just really want to make sure that we are bringing the right people on board for the right reasons, and it's a good match. And it isn't always, but we
That's
find
a
that
great point.
we
That's a
find
great
that having a little bit more built into that process helps us with that clearance process and that vetting process. So we intentionally try not to be so fast in some of these situations. Just a thought.
And just to add to that, what we do is then we take full advantage of the probationary periods. So if you're taking full advantage of the probationary period, because that's really an extension of the interview process. So while we may try to move forward fairly quickly in the onboarding piece of it, I think that once folks come on board, managers do not necessarily take advantage of that probationary period, and that their mindset is that you're, okay, now I'm sort of stuck with you, and what do I do if it is a bad hire? And so even there, you know, I always encourage all managers to use all the flexibilities available to them even after the hiring process.
That's a great point, because that period is not, you can use that period that would otherwise people would just be waiting, right? And can you use that to determine if they're a cultural fit for your agency as well?
Yeah, so we'll use them, we'll use that to make sure it's a cultural fit. What we'll do also is with the personnel security checks, we'll continue on with personnel security checks. We'll do an interim, and then once we have the interim, we'll keep that train moving while now we're making sure that we do have the right mission and employee skill match.
Great.
One thing I wanted to tie in with something that Vicki and both Linda said is with the Economist Conference that we have that comes up at the beginning of the year, the one thing that we learned is we actually post our announcement going into the conference.
Yes.
And so while we're there and we're talking to these individuals, we usually close it a couple of days later and we tell them if, you know, we're interested in you, we'd like to see you as a potential candidate, here's how to get in the door. And so that has also helped. It's a little bit more planning in the front end to make sure that once we get through this process, we've done it in a quick manner.
Yeah.
We're still at around 90 days for our average hiring timeline, and we try and really educate our applicants around that process.
Yeah.
Because I think the more people understand how the process is gonna work, the better off we're gonna be,
Yes.
and people who really wanna come into the agency are gonna be patient enough to get through that process.
That's great.
The only thing I would add is we also have had some success bringing students in early in their college career. So if they come back every summer, every holiday break, they also know that when they finish their degree, they're almost kind of lined up. And I utilized that process a couple of times to convert some students over. So they came back after graduation, they already had their job, they'd already been cleared, because they got cleared like their first summer in college. So I've utilized that strategy as well. And they've also learned that the federal government has so many more careers than they ever thought that we did. So if they start in human resources, I didn't know you could do computers here, I didn't know you could do financial. So they kind of come in and you whet their appetite to all that we have to offer in the various agencies. Even though we have specialized features in all of the agencies, there's still a budget office, there's still attorneys in all of the agencies, there's still an HR office in all of the agencies. So that's been very effective for me to be able to convert some of the students. So they've actually come to me and said, I think I want a career in HR. And so we are able to kind of assess them as well during that time period. We talked about probationary period.
Yeah, that's like
But we're able
4 years.
Exactly, we're able to do a lot of assessment in that time period as well. And we have some who stay local and may do studying online. So we're able to get more time from them as well. So just able to really use a hybrid approach, kind of watching them, they're watching us, to see if it's a career that they want to take on after they finish.
And piggybacking on that, I think that that's the one advantage that we have in the federal space, is that you may not be a fit for one agency, but you're certainly a fit for some agencies.
It's true.
And you take with you all the benefits, the leave, and so just to think of the federal space as one big organization, in which you, as an individual, have an opportunity to explore. I do think that that is a good selling.
That is a great selling point, right? Because there are so many different verticals, if you will, and you can cross-train and move in a fluid manner.
Yeah.
Assuming security clearances aside, you need to get a different one. But that's fantastic. So part of our discussion on the phone for our prep call was, now that you've got them, how do you keep them? So retention. Are you guys doing anything at your agencies to really focus on retention? And if you could share with the room what you're doing, what's working. Anyone want to go first?
I think for me, this is, as I mentioned, the 7th agency. So I've been here 10 weeks at EPA, so it's kind of hard to gauge here. But what I sense here is it's a very, a lot of it is very cultural. I find that culture is very big in most of the agencies. So here, you can see that there's a lot of movement internal. And so a lot of the employees feel like they're part of the EPA culture and family. And so I've noticed in agencies where you have that kind of setup, you tend to keep people a little more. I was sharing with someone this morning where I just came from. They called me yesterday because one of the managers who used to work for me, he died. And the office is just devastated because we had a very family-oriented environment. And so I think when people come in and they kind of feel like all the way from the top parts of leadership all the way down, there's a concern and care and feeling for the staff and the mission of the agency. I think you're more likely to keep individuals. Even here, my first day I had a note from the head of the agency. I've met with him a couple times. And so even coming in as an outsider for me felt like, oh wow, this is different. Very welcoming. And so I think that's one of the things in terms, and we've also mentioned those flexibilities with agencies being a dime a dozen in this area in particular. If you change and we have no telework days, well, Lacey has telework days. Wynn has telework days.
Lacey has a lot of days.
And so right now you have to really, really be competitive as a federal agency because in this area in particular, there are a lot of things that agencies are offering. And so I think, back to some of the other things I mentioned with that career progression and people being able to see how I cannot stay here in this same spot, but the agency is looking to help me develop and grow as an individual. And so that's how I think we've been able to do retention everywhere I've been in terms of the agency culture, just making a person feel belong. Some of those EVS surveys that they talked about, when you get that feedback, that employee engagement is huge. And so feeling like the leadership will hear what we have to say for one, and then most importantly, we'll do something about it. And that's why I think we always get the input, but we don't really do anything with it. So that's what I found has been very
Right,
important.
and then also having developmental opportunities. When folks come in now, they really want to be a contributor on day one. And so it isn't that they would like to earn their stripes, and once they earn their stripes, they're given a peanut. You know, they're wanting to say, hey, I have something to contribute, I'm here to do something. And so what we've been doing at the Federal Trade Commission is offering a lot of, opportunities for self-directed work teams. Those areas where folks have said, this is an area of concern for me and I'm very passionate about it. Well, okay, then now you own that. So go ahead, do some research behind it and give us what some of your thoughts are with it. And I think that has served us really well, because it not only addresses that at an individual level, but it gets to that inclusion piece of diversity and inclusion. And so just giving people an opportunity to be immediate contributors to your organization, to have a voice immediately, and to look for different perspectives and different voices in the room at all levels, so that then when you are making managerial decisions, you're making them in the most thoughtful way that you can, in the most inclusive way.
So we talked a little bit earlier about, just the engagement and using the surveys, and some of the things that we've gotten from the surveys is that we're not really good at communicating. So that's something that we've been really focused on, because we found through the survey data that we're being told that, hey, thanks for all your efforts on whether they're newsletters or whatever, we don't feel like you're hearing us. We don't really see that you're doing anything from our suggestions. So what we've tried to do this year is really focus on those types of things, really pushing our executives out to the populations, hosting town halls, saying we hear you, we're doing WebExes with our undersecretary and deputy undersecretary, just to connect our top folks to the working level employee and make them feel like they have access and can ask those questions. We do a lot around employee recognition, because we've learned from the various survey instruments that we use that some folks just want to be recognized.
Yeah.
And recognition doesn't have to be paid, it doesn't have to be a special act award, it can just be a simple thank you. So we're learning and trying to kind of home grow our managers. If you're really good at being a patent examiner, you're going to be a great manager, and if you're a great manager of 12 or 13 people, you're going to be a fabulous manager of 400 or 500 people. If you're a scientist and engineer and you're growing up that way, sometimes those sort of human interactions, sort of softer skills around people aren't as finely tuned. So we're doing a lot around.
That's well stated.
Yeah.
I like that.
We're doing a lot around getting our most senior executives and managers trained in really how to not be technically competent, but how to be people competent. So we're actually trying to right now scope out what we're calling the Leadership Academy for our top executives, to not focus on the technical piece of it, but focus on the human piece of it and how you engage with your folks. And some fun things that we're doing, we just started a food truck campaign on our campus. So every Tuesday we have food trucks that come out, and this has been a hugely popular endeavor for the employees. And this is something that came up as a suggestion, and it was great. We're doing an innovation challenge, which is kind of an ideation thing. We're going out and saying, here's a competition for you to give us your best ideas, and if you make it through a certain level of review and vetting, you'll get to kind of like through a Shark Tank almost experience, present it to the top executives and see if your idea gets implemented. So we're doing a lot around some fun ideas to just get employees engaged and feel like they're valued and they have a role to play and something that can contribute to the agency.
That sounds like fun.
The food truck.
Yeah, the food truck.
Just to round this out, we're doing better than everybody else is doing. Our current chair came in, and we learned a lot. We actually went out and benchmarked when she came in, because she really wanted to start building a sense of community here at the SEC. And that is really hard, especially as an agency is growing or the agency has not a lot of attrition. So you've got to find a way to kind of bring people together who might have already gone off into their distinct groups. And so we initiated a campaign called All Invested. Basically, the agency is all invested in its employees. And
That's
not,
really neat.
not only about providing benefits, yes, we do offer a lot of different benefits, and I can explain those later if anyone's interested, but it's also around the more of the outreach. So when our chair goes out and she speaks on the Hill, she sends out a personal message and she lets people know she's going to be up on the Hill. And she sends a link so that they can go and watch her talk about the agency. She also does it, we have open commission meetings, and so she tries to share what's going on in her world. And we're a little different that we have a commission and our chair is our primary. But in addition, it's also things like Public Service Recognition Week, which was last week. We had an event every day. And that is really our executives getting involved and being down there, interacting with their employees and letting them know that they are invested in them and that they're interested in them and not just the truly technical piece, but also in them as humans. And when we went and did a recent competency assessment, what we found is that most of our people come in very technically sound, but even at the lowest levels, we need some work on soft skills. And so that's where our university has really focused a lot of attention over the last year and a half, is bringing in more of the soft skills. Because let's face it, especially in our organization, we tend to hire certain types of personalities and people tend to be more introverted. And so we've got to find ways to get people to get out there and get more comfortable with interacting with their colleagues so the communication is shared. Because even if your chair or your senior leadership is talking, people have got to be there to listen to it, and they've got to be there to interact with them and take it back to the rest of their colleagues. And so it's trying to create a holistic approach to listening to the FBBS survey results and trying to engage people to that sense of community that we're building.
Right, closing loop, like taking the feedback, but also acting on it, right?
That's so key.
Show, like, and last time. Do you want to add any more, or?
I started. I'm good.
Closing the loop again, the theme. So we have about 25 minutes left. Should we open up the questions to the audience and people on the phone?
We can, I didn't know if you were gonna take any of the questions from OPM last night or the labor
Yeah.
questions.
Do you have any advice for how you work with the labor unions?
So I have a lot of experience.
Okay.
So at the government printing office, I had 18 different unions, 21 different bargaining units.
Wow.
And so, and they were all very vocal, and at the government printing office, you know, we had pay authority and authority for a lot of other things. And so that was where I started. I spent 20 years there, and one of the things that I will say in that space is, and it wasn't called anything in particular before, you know, so it wasn't called the pre-decisional involvement, it wasn't all these formal names, but when you are working in a heavily unionized organization, and then also speaking, because I was the HR director for the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So that, yeah.
Some experience.
Well, yeah, of course now the Federal Labor Relations Authority wasn't bound by the statute, but because they were the FLRA, they chose to still form a union. And all the attorneys were in the union. So I do think that partnering with your unions at the front end is always a good thing. I think also that, and I think managers get a little confused about this, and that simply because you bring a union in and they're working in cooperation with you for whatever initiative does not mean that then they have agreed or you have now bargained, you know, or negotiated for impact or implementation, or that their members will agree. And so I think that it's really a good idea that before you decide, and even as HR practitioners, we could say that in the HR space, before managers decide that they're going to go down an avenue, engage your HR people early. And so it kind of falls in that same sort of space. You know, when you're working with a labor union, if you talk to them, you say, these are some of the ideas that we're toying with. What are your knee-jerk reactions to that? This is the direction that we're going. Maybe before you send out blast messages agency-wide, you say to your unions, this is what our intentions are, you know, take a look at it, our plans to do this in the next 24 hours, and so unless we hear from you, we're gonna proceed. And so if you look at unions and respect them for what they are not your adversarial group. They are not there to block anything that management is wanting to do. But they are there to work in cooperation with you and to represent the labor organization. And I think that you travel further and faster by bringing them in early, keeping them apprised of what you're doing, being very transparent, and then seeing them as the true partner they are, and respecting that their organization is there to make a difference, just as you as a management official are there.
I think that was well said. The only thing I would just add is, you know, along the lines of what Vicki said, is about really communicating. And I think a lot of times we have so much mistrust, one for the other, that it causes the relationship to continue to be strained. Along those lines, most are there just to get their job done, but some are there to make our life really miserable. I found in the HR space, but I also found that when we involve them early and often, we don't have as much back and forth and as much issue. And I think that relationship building is huge in that situation. I think we also have to change how we look at the union officials as well, because we automatically think because they ask to come into a meeting or because they're the union and, you know, on the opposing side, that it has to be serial. It does not. And speaking from just coming into the agency, I've already had that meeting with my union officials to kind of sit down and just talk about some sticking points for us, some things that they need from HR, and how we can best partner. And so I think if we do that, I think that goes a long way. I think the other thing that I've encouraged my staff to do is do more training for managers, because I think a lot of the leadership does not know how to interact back and forth one to the other with the unions as well. And so we're going to be working in that area. Some of those areas are less clear cut and black and white as some of the other areas. A lot of gray areas when you're dealing with when you have to bargain, when you don't have to bargain, what they can be present for, what they can't, what voice they have, what they don't. I found in some agencies, the union kind of run the agency, and so the office kind of, you know, starts to say, well, the union's not going to let us. But if you're carrying out the mission, you have to do the mission of the agency. And if you make sure that the union is involved and they understand that, it's good.
So I would absolutely advocate and completely agree with what Vicki and what Linda has said. Working with the unions needs to be an operational strategy for your organization. It is the only way that you're going to be able to execute on your mission and vision. And having said that, and while I agree with that, we each have roles to play. They represent the employees, and then management represents management. So as much as we can come together, and a lot of times, work on things, work through things, the product is better because we've involved the unions, absolutely. The product is better because the unions have involved management. I mean, it goes both ways. You know, sometimes at the end of the day, you do reach an impasse, and then there are mechanisms in place, you know, to deal with that impasse. But I absolutely recommend to reach out and partner with your unions to the extent that you can. We have at the USPTO a long history with our unions, a lot of it not good. And I want to say in the 90s and 2000s, it was really a very negative environment. It was just toxic. And I want to say in an FLRA decision, it actually quoted the toxic relationship of the unions at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. It was just mind-numbing. And I was a baby patent examiner at the time, so I really didn't know that much about it. But as I came up through management, you know, began to recognize, you know, I had friends that were in the unions, and they were really just trying to do their job. And for us, the turning point was when we had an undersecretary come in, Dave Campos, in 2008, and his fundamental first thing that he did was, we've got to change this. And it was senior leadership getting involved and saying, you need to lock yourself in a room with the unions, to his management staff, and saying to the unions, you need to lock yourself in the room with my management staff and figure this out. And from there, really evolved a much better, much more collaborative relationship with the unions. And we see it in our FEDS results, because even if you don't think as an employee that you've not actively joined a union, you are still by law represented by the union. So you're just making a mistake if you're not working with your unions, and we've seen that with our results. Employee engagement goes up when the unions are more engaged and they're more active and they're more partnering. It goes down when they're not, because there is that dialogue between the employee and the union, and you're just smart not to work with that, and not to recognize. I mean, you're dumb not to recognize that. So that's just my experience, and so yeah, please work with your unions. But at the end of the day, recognize that there may be a situation where you're just not going to be on the same page, and there are just pathways to take from there.
And this is just another FLRA plug, because it is an agency that I absolutely love. I think that they have strong leadership, and I do think that the folks there are very passionate about what they do. Anytime that you are struggling in your relationships with the unions, the FLRA regional offices, which there are 7, and the headquarters office, they are all there to offer assistance. They are there to offer training. So you can send your managers and employees to the FLRA for training. And then if you get stuck and you need someone to come in to just help you before you even reach an impasse, they have help there to come in and work on the 1 or 2 issues where you may not be able to see eye to eye.
It's just one additional thing that I'd like to add is acknowledging the fact that we hire a lot of people from industry. We also hire managers from industry, and they've never had any exposure to federal labor unions.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we require is a class for them.
Yeah.
In their first year's management, they have to go through a series of courses around what it's like to deal with a federal labor union, because I agree with Linda, many of them come in, or even some of our employees who are now coming over to the other side, don't quite understand their obligations. And so if we don't take the time to educate them around how to deal in a unionized environment, we really are hurting ourselves, because
Right.
otherwise, as Wynn has said so well, we experience the same thing here at the SEC. You get a toxic relationship, it's really hard to come out of that.
Yes.
Excellent. So we have 50 minutes left. Why don't we open up to some questions in the room, and then we'll go to the phone. Yeah. Yes.
Ask the panel to focus for a moment on senior level industry hires from industries that you regulate. How do you deal with folks who are coming over with compensation packages that are tied to the previous employer, which is an employer of the industry that you regulate? How do you deal with potential employees who are married to or otherwise related to people who are in the industry that you regulate?
So we have our ethics office at the FTC for all senior leaders that come in, or folks where there may be questions about things that they disclose on some of their financial statements. And there, some research is done, and then if it's found that there could be a potential conflict, those folks are given, these are the cases that you cannot work on, these are the things that you can't touch, this is information you don't have access to. And for good or bad, even in our OCIO office, those, it's locked down. That stuff is locked down to that particular individual. I mean, certainly they'll hear about it, just like all other folks at the FTC would hear about it, but they would not be allowed to have any direct involvement in those issues where they have some sort of personal interest.
It's the same for, I had to recuse myself from any eBay discussions at all while I'm here. And my husband is also part of the U.S. Digital Service, and he's on leave from Intuit. So they treat us as one person. So for us, I have to recuse myself from both Intuit and eBay discussions, and he has to do the same.
Would the digital service have kept you from keeping any investment, though, even if you put it in a blind trust, or would they say you have to divest yourself?
I didn't have to divest, but I cannot be in any conversations discussing eBay or Intuit. Some people chose to divest, and then to interact with their former employer, but I did not.
So the Office of Government Ethics has extensive requirements for those that are coming into the executive ranks within the government. So I think all of us are party to those that it would have that complication when you're recruiting for someone who's coming into the executive role. I will say that for the SEC, we have supplemental government ethics requirements, and we are probably one of the most rigid because of the fact that we regulate the
Yes.
majority of these companies.
Right.
And so we have, there's that.
That little detail.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
we have actually encountered complications with bringing people within government into our agency because they have, their spouses have relationships or they're employed by an outside entity. And so I will not deny the fact that it is very complicated and there's a lot of ethics requirements for our agency alone. And so even just the recusal piece becomes much more complicated in our agency.
Not just for entry level candidates, but also maybe mid-career, have we talked about, maybe lack of better words, a rotational program within the government? Because as, you know, I know Linda and Vicky were mentioning, there's so many jobs that when you walk into an EPA, you may say, I didn't know this job even existed. Then you may say, you know what, maybe I'm not a big fan of EPA, but I really want to, FTC is where I would want to experiment with, so to speak. Has there been any kind of cross-government communications as far as, because that would be, in my opinion, I think that'd be a great way to help attract some, not just entry-level, but also mid-level career people to see what is in government. Because myself, I grew up in Florida, not very big in government agencies, and moving up here, I never knew these even existed, for lack of better words. So, as far as, you know, branding and getting that awareness out there, has there been that type of communication or maybe programs that could be set up?
So there's a question from the audience around the idea of having cross-agency developmental opportunities where people would go into different agencies and learn what exposure opportunities there would be. We actually have at the SEC a community of practice, it's the financial regulatory, and so it's called FinArc. And so we rotate people across 7 different agencies and they have detail opportunities for 6 months at a time. I know the intelligence community has a very similar program. So you see communities of practice building these types of programs so that people can go out and they can get exposure into several different agencies. For one, it's a benefit to those that respective agency because it's in their same community. So people get exposure and then they can bring back that great knowledge. But then I know that OPM also has, and there's several leadership development programs that allow for people to go into any type of agency within the federal government to gain some additional knowledge. And so you do see those programs, and so I think it just depends on what type of area you're looking to get into and how you could leverage those programs to move around government.
And another thing I want to add, we participate too in the leadership programs through OPM. We're a little different in that we're very unique in the job that we do at the Patent and Trademark Office in terms of issuing patents and registering trademarks. So there's not a lot of detail opportunities in that like-minded type of work. So if someone were to seek something out, and certainly we've sent folks to the Copyright Office and things that are more intellectual property related, there's just not that many opportunities. It takes them a little bit out of their career path for the period of time because they're not doing that like type of work that gets them to the next grade. So it's a tricky challenge that we've been wrestling with. We don't have as many detailed opportunities outside of the agency as other agencies might.
And I would pretty much say the same, other than the leadership programs where there's much more flexibility in moving around. I haven't seen it so much. Because what happens a lot of times, if I'm loaning you from an agency, so to speak, the position is still encumbered, and I still need somebody to do it. I've noticed a lot of movement within the EPA, and then just you have somebody in that office that may be able to fill in. Like I said, I get a detailed announcement every day, so there's a lot of movement internal, but I don't really see us at that place yet where we're doing as much external. And I think going forward, as we look at, we've lost a lot of the expertise in the federal government globally, especially in the HR arena. We were just talking about it this week in one of our CHICO meetings. And so as we look at that, we're probably gonna have to do more of that in order to help us fill in some of the skills gaps that we have. But right now, I don't see it as prevalent as probably we'll need to, because we prefer that a person either stay in our agency or in the federal government than leave altogether. And so I think that that could be the wave of the future, but I don't see us doing as much of it now.
I think it's a great idea. I think we try to do that at the USGS by nature of what we do. We go into the various agencies and we're trying to provide tech strategy and tech help. And so we've been able to detail people out to Department of Homeland Security, for example, Veterans Affairs, Social Security, et cetera. But it's by virtue of what we're actually trying to do, which is trying to build, digital service teams at these various agencies. But I think it's a great idea, and I think we definitely have that interest of people moving from agency to agency because it's a new experience, and it's great to keep learning and expand that way. Okay, he had a question, yeah.
The question's related to, as Vicki said, mission skills alignment. And so, the data exists, especially with young people like Linda's hiring people out of college. Because the kids text, post everything about themselves, right? That's easy.
Why?
But I don't know. I didn't quote it. I'm just saying what exists, right?
Yeah.
But the three of you are looking for, everybody wants the Harvard, Stanford, Harvard, and then 7 years out of college, in antitrust, you're going to need a variety of experience, right? Because they have the antitrust issue is across the platform, Then you have the patent trademark, you need the same thing. So how do you look at the, and you LinkedIn, great open source, or social media resource, right? But then you have all these other social media opportunities, the 4 to 5 years before you graduate high school experience that's never put on the resume of a Harvard, right? So you're looking at, but you want to triage because you got 500 applications. So how do you pick 20 to bring in, right? But the data's all there, just not what they submitted. And if you really want the most talented guy, like I know one of the most talented computational linguists in the world, his resume says MIT Harvard. That's it. Doesn't even have the year. So what do you mine? That's external, but then you have internal. You have your program that's fantastic, the 6-month rotation. But then what about the hard worker that is on the team? Because they say one of the #1 reasons why people quit is because they didn't get offered a promotion. Not that they wanted it, but they view themselves as good as the lady and guy next door, but nobody even talked to them about the promotion. So I'm kind of asking it, complicated.
So can I tell you from personal experience, I'm Bowie State University. So I'm not the Harvard. I am Harvard Kennedy School, much later. But I'm PG Community College and Bowie State University. And so when I came into the government printing office, I came in as an outstanding scholar. That program no longer exists. But I came in as an outstanding scholar. I was put in through the Superintendent of Documents Organization. That's the group within the printing office that sells government publications. It's two-year rotational assignments, and then I was placed in where there was a great match. Stayed in there for a little while, then went on to do supply work, talking about what experiences, what exposures can you have if you want to explore. So I came in as a management program analyst, then went into the supply field, then went into distribution facilities, came back to management analytical work, and then went into a leadership program, and I said, I don't think I'm necessarily aligned. And so I moved into HR. And once I moved into HR, of course, when someone first asks you, do you want to come into HR, for some people that are in the technical field, you're like, oh, that is an insult.
No.
I don't understand. Because at one point in the federal sector, that would be considered like the rubber room.
But how do they find you?
How they found me was through my good works in the different fields that I was in.
You make yourself findable.
Because you make yourself right. You make yourself findable. If there are opportunities for self-directed work teams, if you see a problem and you say, I'd like to go and seek that problem out, then you do that. And some of the small agencies in particular, small agencies are always looking for other hands. And so while you may have come in, like you spoke about the antitrust, we do want someone, so if you're gonna work in the housing piece of it, you want someone that understands housing and law. If you're doing retail, you want somebody that maybe worked in a store and knows law. And so, some of our agencies are starting to build, and here's what's really tricky now is all the privacy kind of issues. And so what we're trying to do now is build databases where you say, these are all of my skills. And so if you have a project that needs these types of skills, do a database search, and then, hey, this is someone that may be available. So while I do think that, like with some of the Schedule A authorities, you just talked about attorneys specifically, there is that, what are the top schools, but then George Mason, right across the way, they have a great antitrust program. And so you go to where you've had successes in the past, and then you just hope for some of those successes going forward. But I do think that each of us individually, each of our agencies individually, start to see, hey, these are some folks that, regardless of how they grew up in the federal sector, they have some other skill sets that we'd like to tap into. Because again, while we don't want to lose them to the federal sector, we don't mind necessarily, we don't like it, but it would still be better to lose them to another federal agency.
The only thing I would add to that, you asked about the resume, and I think that's one of the things that I have found. A lot of people external do not know how to write a resume for the federal government, and they're not one and the same. So that has been a huge thing that I get a lot of people that come up to me, they know I'm in HR, in my external life. Can you take a look at my resume? And so we used to have the old 171 and all of that, where you had to put all the information. Well, now a lot of resumes you get don't have it. So you don't have salary. As you mentioned, you have MIT. That's it. And so that's your sales pitch right there. So if the person has done something other than gone to MIT, that information needs to be in that resume, because if I'm looking at 100 resumes, or hopefully not, if I'm looking at 20. So if I'm looking at 20 for one job, that resume is all that I have to go on until I get to the interview. And so that resume is big for me to look and kind of see what experiences I can gather. So I tell most people to write their resume in a way that even though they're not applying for an executive job, to make sure that they're just not listing their duties like you would do in a position description. So don't just tell me, I filed this, I did that. I filed 100 cases and the industry standard is 50. And I did that in a week's time, and we had a backlog of whatever. And that's totally different from I just filed the mail. And so I think that's a big part that we can work on in that front end, showing people how to even write to the federal government, because it's different for the public sector. For the private sector, totally different. And most of the resumes that I get do not have all the information that I need. I have to call people. So what's your salary? Because it's very important to know when you're looking at what grade they qualify for in the federal government. And so it's almost an apples to orange mix. So if the person works very diligently on their resume, I think that would be very helpful in addition to what they learned at MIT and in those various industries.
I would second that. From our end, we also put in our vacancy announcements that your resume will be how we will evaluate your pay, and that you need to include all relevant experience that you would want to be considered. So we have people, I literally had someone who said, I was served ice cream at Dairy Queen. And I know that sounds crazy, but that is, they go all the way back to their high school experience, and they put it on there, and that allows us to get a better understanding of truly what their background is and what they're coming to us with. So I completely agree with Linda. The other thing I would also contribute on this one is the fact that people need to be conscientious of how the government works. And I have frequently people who just send their resume to a random employee and think that that's how they get the entree into the government. And so they're in big trouble there. But I think it's USA Jobs and OPM tries very hard, and I think agencies have resources out there for people to understand how the federal hiring process works. So even people who are coming from within government. You might have been lucky and came in as a student, but you're now 10 years into your position. I see federal employees who can't get through the hiring process because they haven't done the research to understand how the process truly works. So the more informed you are as an applicant, the better off you're probably going to be on getting through the process and being considered one of those top candidates.
And just the last thing to add to that one is I think it also too, as much as getting your resume considered is really, really important, it's also making sure that your hiring specialist and your HR department is working closely with that business unit to understand what that business unit is looking at. Because it's not going to do anybody any good to get a gold candidate bunch of 500 resumes. And so you really need to have your your HR specialist, your hiring specialist, working really closely with that servicing business unit to make sure what it is they're looking for, what's important to them, what's going to stand on the resume, and how do you refine that candidate pool.
We're running out of time, and so, because we have such a distinguished panel, everybody, I know there's still a lot more questions. You have, for everybody on the phone, I apologize, we didn't get a chance to get to you. You have contact information on the flyer, Debbie Brown at yahoo.com or brown.e3@yahoo.com. If anybody has a question, please send it to me and I will forward it to whatever panel member that you want to aim it at, or all of them. I really want to thank you guys. It's been really a terrific discussion. We have most of it videotaped, and again, I apologize that we ran out of time and just can't answer everybody's questions. So, thank you.
Thank you.